The morning sun cast long shadows across Nellis Air Force Base as Captain Sarah Mitchell adjusted her flight suit one last time. In 12 hours, she would prove that sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest thunder. What started as a humiliating dismissal from a routine training exercise would end with the roar of twin engines overhead and a lesson that would echo through military corridors for decades to come. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell never imagined that her Tuesday morning coffee would taste like betrayal. The steam rose from her mug as she sat in the cramped briefing room at Camp Pendleton, surrounded by 24 Marines who had grown accustomed to her presence over the past 6 months. As the only Air Force liaison officer assigned to the Joint Training Operation, Sarah had worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between air and ground forces, earning respect through her meticulous planning and unwavering dedication. But training exercise, codenamed Operation Desert Thunder, was designed to test inter-service cooperation in simulated combat scenarios. For weeks, Sarah had coordinated air support missions, synchronized timing with ground units, and ensured that every pilot knew exactly when and where to deliver their payloads. Her attention to detail had prevented countless potential disasters, and her calm demeanor under pressure had earned her the nickname Steady Sarah among the aviators. Colonel Marcus Brennan strode into the briefing room with his characteristic swagger, his chest adorned with ribbons that spoke of battles fought in distant lands. Behind him followed Major Derek Harrison, a man whose reputation for old-school military thinking preceded him like a warning shot. Sarah had encountered both officers before, but their interactions had been limited to formal military protocol and brief operational discussions. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brennan announced, his voice carrying the authority of 25 years in uniform, "today marks the culmination of 6 months of intensive training. Operation Desert Thunder will demonstrate our ability to coordinate complex multi-service operations under realistic combat conditions." Sarah listened intently, her notebook filled with carefully organized notes about aircraft positioning, fuel calculations, and communication protocols. She had spent the previous evening double-checking every detail, ensuring that the air support component would execute flawlessly. The F-16 Fighting Falcons were scheduled to arrive in precise intervals, their pilots briefed on target coordinates that Sarah had personally verified through satellite imagery and ground reconnaissance. Major Harrison stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Sarah with unmistakable disapproval. "Before we proceed," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut glass, "there's a matter that needs addressing. This exercise is designed to test real combat readiness, not to accommodate political correctness or diversity initiatives." The room fell silent, the only sound coming from the air conditioning unit that struggled against the Nevada heat. Sarah felt the weight of 24 pairs of eyes, some curious, others uncomfortable, but all waiting to see what would unfold. "Captain Mitchell," Harrison continued, his voice growing louder, "I've reviewed your file, and while I'm sure you're perfectly competent in an office environment, this exercise requires personnel who understand the reality of combat operations. Real combat. The kind where lives depend on split-second decisions and physical capability." Sarah's coffee cup trembled slightly in her hands, but her voice remained steady. "Sir, I've been coordinating the air support component for this exercise since day one. Every pilot has been briefed according to my operational plans, and all aircraft are positioned according to my calculations." Brennan nodded dismissively. "That's precisely the issue, Captain. Coordination and planning are valuable skills, but they're support functions. Today's exercise simulates actual combat conditions, and we need personnel who can operate under that pressure without becoming a liability." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Sarah understood the implication immediately. but she needed to hear it spoken aloud. "What exactly are you suggesting, sir?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Harrison replied, his satisfaction evident. "I'm ordering you to remove your flight suit and report to administrative duties for the duration of this exercise. We'll handle the air coordination through proper channels, meaning personnel who actually belong in a combat zone." The briefing room erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. Several Marines shifted in their seats, their faces reflecting the awkwardness of witnessing what felt like a public execution. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Rodriguez, who had worked closely with Sarah on logistics planning, looked visibly angry, her jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Sarah stood slowly, her chair scraping against the concrete floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. "Colonel Brennan, with respect, I've been planning this air support operation for 6 months. The pilots are expecting my coordination signals, and the ground units have been trained to work with my timing protocols." Brennan waved his hand dismissively. "The pilots will receive their orders through proper military channels, not from some liaison officer playing dress-up in a flight suit. Major Harrison will assume responsibility for air coordination, as should have been the case from the beginning." "Sir," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength despite the humiliation burning in her chest, "Major Harrison hasn't been involved in the planning process. He doesn't know the specific coordinates, the backup protocols, or the contingency procedures that took months to develop." Harrison stepped closer, his intimidation tactics as obvious as his contempt. "Captain, I've been coordinating air support since before you learned to tie your boots. I don't need months of planning to call in an airstrike. What I need is for you to stop questioning direct orders and remove that uniform before you embarrass yourself further." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence carried a different weight. It was the silence of witnesses to an injustice, the silence of people watching someone's career get destroyed for reasons that had nothing to do with competence or capability. Sarah looked around the room, meeting the eyes of Marines who had worked with her, trusted her judgment, and relied on her expertise. She saw anger, disappointment, and frustration, but she also saw something else: resignation. They had witnessed this before, in different forms and different circumstances, and they knew that speaking up would only redirect the target toward themselves. "Understood, sir," Sarah said finally, her voice carrying a note that Brennan and Harrison couldn't quite identify. It wasn't defeat, but it wasn't defiance either. It was something else entirely, something that should have served as a warning, if they had been smart enough to recognize it. Sarah began unbuttoning her flight suit with deliberate precision, each button releasing with a soft click that seemed to punctuate the injustice unfolding in the briefing room. The sage green fabric fell away to reveal the simple khaki uniform underneath, transforming her from an aviator into just another administrative officer. "I'll report to headquarters for reassignment," she said, folding the flight suit with military precision. "I assume you'll want my operational plans and coordination protocols transferred to Major Harrison immediately." Harrison waved dismissively. "We won't be needing your plans, Captain. Real military operations don't require color-coded charts and PowerPoint presentations. We'll handle this the way it should have been handled from the beginning, with experienced combat personnel making the decisions." Sarah placed her folded flight suit on the table with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence of what had just occurred. "Of course, sir. I'm sure you'll find everything runs smoothly, without those unnecessary complications." As she gathered her belongings, Sarah caught the eye of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," with genuine regret. Captain Tom Bradley, a Marine aviator who had worked extensively with Sarah on joint operations, looked like he wanted to say something but ultimately remained silent, his loyalty to the chain of command overriding his personal convictions. The walk to the briefing room door felt like a mile, with every step carrying the weight of 6 months of hard work being dismissed in a matter of minutes. Sarah had coordinated with dozens of pilots, memorized hundreds of coordinates, and developed contingency plans for every conceivable scenario. Now all of that expertise was being discarded because two men with antiquated attitudes couldn't see past their own prejudices out at the door. Sarah paused and turned back to face the room. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence, "I hope today's exercise exceeds your expectations." There was something in her tone that made several people in the room look up sharply, but Brennan and Harrison were too busy congratulating themselves on their decisive leadership to notice the subtle shift in atmosphere. "It will, Captain," Brennan replied confidently. "It absolutely will." Sarah nodded once and left the briefing room, her soft-soled shoes making no sound as she walked down the corridor toward an uncertain future. Behind her, the planning for Operation Desert Thunder continued without the person who had designed it, coordinated it, and prepared for every possible contingency. What Brennan and Harrison didn't know, what they couldn't have known because they had never bothered to look beyond their assumptions, was that Captain Sarah Mitchell wasn't just an Air Force liaison officer with a talent for organization and planning. She wasn't just someone who looked good in a flight suit, or who had earned her position through diversity, initiatives, or political correctness. Sarah Mitchell was a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, where she had finished third in her class in aeronautical engineering. She was a trained fighter pilot with over 2,000 hours of flight time in various aircraft, including 800 hours specifically in F-16 Fighting Falcons. She held certifications in air-to-air combat, precision bombing, and close air support operations. More importantly, she was the daughter of retired Air Force General Patricia Mitchell, a woman who had broken barriers and shattered glass ceilings throughout her 30-year career. General Mitchell had raised her daughter to understand that excellence wasn't just about meeting expectations. It was about exceeding them so thoroughly that doubt became impossible. As Sarah walked through the base toward the administrative offices, she pulled out her cell phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Mitchell." "Hi, Mom, it's Sarah. I need to ask you a favor." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. General Patricia Mitchell's office at the Pentagon buzzed with activity even at 7 in the morning. Awards and commendations lined the walls, telling the story of a woman who had spent 3 decades proving that excellence transcends gender. When her secure phone rang with Sarah's number, she immediately sensed the controlled fury in her daughter's voice. "They did what?" Patricia's tone shifted from maternal concern to military precision in milliseconds. "And you're certain this Harrison character is coordinating the air support for today's exercise?" Sarah stood in the parking lot of Camp Pendleton, watching helicopters practice landing maneuvers in the distance. "Positive." He dismissed 6 months of planning as color-coded charts and PowerPoint presentations. "They're running Operation Desert Thunder in 4 hours with improvised coordination." Patricia pulled up classified databases on her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Major Derek Harrison's service record appeared on screen, revealing a pattern that made her jaw tighten. 3 previous incidents of discrimination, 2 formal complaints that had been quietly buried, and a concerning history of operational failures when placed in positions requiring inter-service cooperation. "Sarah, I need you to listen carefully," Patricia said, her voice carrying the weight of decades in command. "What I'm about to arrange isn't revenge, it's a teachable moment. Are you current on your F-16 qualifications?" 800 hours. "Mom, my last check ride was 2 months ago. Perfect. Report to Nellis immediately. Ask for Colonel Amanda Foster in the 64th Aggressor Squadron. Tell her General Mitchell authorized Operation Thunderbolt. She understand." Sarah felt a familiar electricity in her chest. The same sensation she'd experienced during her first solo flight years ago. What exactly is Operation Thunderbolt? Something that's been a long time coming. Drive safe, sweetheart. And Sarah? Make sure you're wearing your flight suit when you arrive. 3 hours later, Sarah stood in the briefing room at Nellis Air Force Base, facing Colonel Amanda Foster, a woman whose reputation as a pilot exceeded even her legendary status as a trainer of fighter pilots. Foster had been studying Sarah's service record with the intensity of a hawk examining prey. "Your mother speaks very highly of your capabilities," Foster said, closing the folder. "She also mentioned that you've been personally coordinating the air support for today's exercise." "At Pendleton?" "Yes, ma'am. Every target, every timing sequence, every contingency protocol." Foster smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. It was the smile of someone who had witnessed too many talented officers sidelined by ignorance and prejudice. "Then, you know exactly what's going to go wrong when unqualified personnel attempt to coordinate operations they don't understand." Sarah nodded grimly. "Major Harrison has never worked with close air support in a multi-service environment. He's going to rely on standard protocols that don't account for the specific terrain and unit positioning we've been training with, which means delayed response times, confused targeting, and potential friendly fire incidents during the live-fire portions of the exercise." Foster stood and walked to a wall map showing the southwestern United States. Red pins marked various military installations, with Pendleton highlighted in bright yellow. "Your mother has authorized me to provide you with an F-16C from our training fleet. Your mission is to provide proper air support for Operation Desert Thunder, ensuring the safety of ground personnel who are operating under inadequate coordination." Sarah's heart began racing. "Ma'am, are you saying—" "I'm saying that sometimes the most important lessons in leadership come from witnessing the consequences of poor decision-making. Your presence will ensure that those consequences don't include casualties." Foster led Sarah through the hangar to where a pristine F-16C Fighting Falcon waited, its gray and white camouflage paint gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Ground crews were already performing final checks, having received their orders 30 minutes earlier. "This is Viper 77, Foster explained, running her hand along the aircraft's smooth fuselage. "She's equipped with training rounds for the live-fire portions, but her targeting systems are fully operational. You'll be able to provide precise coordinates and timing that Major Harrison's ground-based coordination simply cannot match." Sarah approached the aircraft with reverence, her hands tracing the familiar controls and surfaces she had trained on for years. The F-16 was more than a machine to her. It was a symphony of engineering and precision, a tool that transformed human skill into devastating effectiveness. "What about clearance? Coordination with Pendleton's air traffic control?" Foster's smile widened. "Already arranged. Pendleton believes they're receiving additional air support from Nellis as part of a training evaluation. They're expecting an F-16 to arrive for the final phase of their exercise. And Harrison? We'll learn that assuming incompetence is a dangerous mistake." Sarah spent the next hour reviewing current weather conditions, studying satellite imagery of the exercise area, and memorizing radio frequencies for ground units. Unlike Harrison's improvised approach, she would arrive prepared for every possible scenario, armed with months of planning and the flying skills to execute perfectly. The F-16's engine spooled up with a sound like controlled thunder, sending vibrations through the concrete beneath Sarah's feet. She completed her pre-flight checklist with methodical precision, each item checked and verified according to procedures that had been drilled into her through hundreds of hours of training. At exactly 1:30 p.m., Sarah Mitchell lifted off from Nellis Air Force Base, climbing into the Nevada sky with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. The F-16 responded to her commands like an extension of her own body, rolling and banking with fluid grace as she set course for Camp Pendleton. Meanwhile, at Pendleton, Operation Desert Thunder was already experiencing the problems Sarah had predicted. Major Harrison stood in the command center, staring at radio equipment that seemed to mock his attempts at coordination. The first wave of ground units had moved into position, but their requests for air support timing were met with confusion and delayed responses. Desert Thunder Control, this is Alpha Company. We need confirmation on air support arrival time for target grid 77 Alpha. Harrison fumbled with his maps, trying to locate coordinates that Sarah had memorized weeks ago. Alpha Company, stand by for air support timing. UH stand by. Colonel Brennan paced behind Harrison, his earlier confidence evaporating with each garbled radio transmission. Major, where the hell is our air coordination? These units need precise timing to avoid walking into their own ordnance. Sir, I'm working on it. The timing calculations are more complex than I anticipated. Complex? You said this was basic military procedure. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been quietly monitoring communications, finally spoke up. Sir, Captain Mitchell had all of these calculations prepared. She spent weeks working out the timing sequences for each unit's position and movement patterns. Harrison spun around, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Sergeant, I don't need some desk jockey's calculations to coordinate air support. Real combat doesn't follow spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations. Sir, Rodriguez continued, her voice carrying barely controlled frustration, Captain Mitchell isn't a desk jockey. She's a qualified fighter pilot with over 2,000 hours of flight time. Brennan froze mid-pace. What did you say? Captain Mitchell is a graduate of the Air Force Academy and a certified F-16 pilot. She's been flying combat aircraft longer. Then Major Harrison has been coordinating air support. The command center fell silent, except for the constant chatter of radio communications requesting coordination that wasn't coming. Brennan's face went through several color changes as the implications became clear. Are you telling me, Brennan said slowly, that we dismissed a qualified fighter pilot from coordinating air support ... so that we could replace her with someone who doesn't know how to coordinate air support? Before anyone could answer, a new voice crackled through the radio speakers, clear and professional. Desert Thunder Control, this is Viper 77, requesting permission to enter your airspace for air support operations. Harrison grabbed the radio microphone. Viper 77, this is Desert Thunder Control. You're cleared into our airspace. What's your estimated time to target the area? Desert Thunder Control, I'm currently 15 minutes out from your first target grid. I have detailed coordinates for all scheduled targets and am prepared to provide close air support with precision timing. Something about the voice made Rodriguez smile for the first time all day. It was calm, professional, and completely confident. Everything the current coordination was lacking. Viper 77, we're having some technical difficulties with our coordination here. Our normal coordination officer is unavailable. Copy that, Desert Thunder Control. I'm fully briefed on the operation and can provide coordination directly with ground units if needed. I have all target coordinates, timing sequences, and contingency protocols prepared. Harrison's face went pale. The pilot was describing exactly the kind of detailed preparation that Sarah had insisted was necessary, preparation that he had dismissed as unnecessary complications. Viper 77, how do you have detailed coordinates for this exercise? Desert Thunder Control, I've been planning this operation for 6 months. I know every target, every timing requirement, and every safety protocol. I'm prepared to ensure this exercise runs smoothly and safely. The command center erupted in whispered conversations as the implications became clear. Brennan grabbed the radio microphone from Harrison's trembling hands. Viper 77, This is Colonel Brennan, Exercise Commander. Please identify yourself. Colonel Brennan, this is Captain Sarah Mitchell, reporting for air support duties as originally assigned. The silence that followed was so complete, it seemed to absorb sound from the surrounding area. Harrison's face cycled through embarrassment, rage, and dawning understanding of just how badly he had miscalculated. Captain Mitchell, Brennan said finally, his voice carefully controlled. I thought you were reassigned to administrative duties. I was, sir. But it turns out that my administrative duties today include ensuring the success of Operation Desert Thunder. I'm currently inbound in an F-16C from Nellis Air Force Base, fully equipped and prepared to provide the air support coordination that this exercise requires. Rodriguez couldn't suppress her grin any longer. Several Marines in the command center were struggling to maintain their composure, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Viper 77, Brennan continued. Are you saying you're currently flying an F-16? Affirmative, Desert Thunder Control. F-16C Fighting Falcon, fully armed with training ordnance, and ready to provide precision air support for all scheduled targets. My estimated arrival time is 12 minutes. Harrison sank into his chair, the weight of his assumptions crashing down around him. He had dismissed Sarah as incompetent, only to discover that she was more qualified than he was. He had mocked her planning, only to find himself desperately needing those same plans. And now she was approaching in a fighter jet, ready to demonstrate exactly what he had so confidently dismissed. Captain Mitchell, Brennan said, his voice now carrying a note of grudging respect. We appreciate your dedication to the mission. Thank you, sir. I'm simply ensuring that Operation Desert Thunder proceeds according to plan. The plan that took 6 months to develop and coordinate. The plan that accounts for every variable and contingency that we're about to encounter. Sarah's voice remained perfectly professional, but everyone in the command center could hear the underlying message. She was about to show them exactly what they had thrown away. The roar of twin engines echoed across the desert landscape as Sarah Mitchell's F-16 appeared. On the horizon, a silver speck against the cloudless sky that grew larger with each passing second. In the command center at Camp Pendleton, 24 pairs of eyes watched the radar screen as Viper 77 approached their airspace with the precision of a surgical instrument. Major Harrison sat frozen at his coordination station, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. The radio chatter from ground units had become increasingly desperate over the past 20 minutes, with Alpha Company requesting immediate air support for their advance on Target Bravo, while Charlie Company needed precise timing coordination to avoid moving into their own ordnance impact zone. Desert Thunder Control, this is Alpha Company Leader, crackled through the speakers. We're pinned down at grid reference 84 Charlie and need immediate close air support. Our current position is danger close to the target area. Harrison fumbled with his maps, his hands shaking as he tried to locate the grid reference. Danger close meant that the ground troops were within the minimum safe distance of their own air support, a situation requiring split-second precision and intimate knowledge of both the terrain and the units' exact positions. Alpha Company. This is Desert Thunder Control, ... Stand by for target confirmation. Desert Thunder Control, we don't have time to stand by. We need that air support now, or we're going to take casualties. Before Harrison could respond, Sarah's voice cut through the radio chatter with crystalline clarity. Alpha Company, this is Viper 77. I have your position marked and am beginning my approach run. Your target is 200 meters north-northeast of your current position. I need you to mark your forward elements with smoke in 30 seconds. Viper 77, this is Alpha Company Leader. Roger, marking forward elements with green smoke in 30 seconds. How did you get our exact position? Alpha Company, I've been tracking your movement patterns for the past 6 months. I know where you are. where you're going, and exactly how much clearance you need for safe air support. Colonel Brennan grabbed his binoculars and stepped outside the command center, scanning the sky until he spotted Sarah's F-16 approaching. From the northwest, the aircraft moved with fluid grace, banking slightly as it lined up for what appeared to be a textbook close air support run. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez followed Brennan outside, her expression mixing vindication with professional admiration. "Sir, Captain Mitchell planned every approach angle for this terrain. She knows exactly how to deliver ordnance without endangering ground troops." Through the radio, they could hear Sarah's calm voice coordinating with Alpha Company. "Alpha Company, I have visual on your green smoke. Confirm all friendly personnel are at least 100 meters south of the smoke marker." Viper 77, all friendly personnel confirmed 100 meters south of the marker. "Roger, Alpha Company. Beginning attack run on the target north-northeast of your smoke. Impact in 45 seconds. Keep your heads down." The F-16 dove from 12,000 feet with controlled aggression, its targeting systems locked onto coordinates that Sarah had memorized months ago. The precision of her approach was breathtaking, a demonstration of skill that combined technical expertise with intimate knowledge of the training scenario. The simulated ordnance struck its target with devastating accuracy, sending up a plume of sand and smoke exactly 200 meters from Alpha Company's position. The explosion was close enough to feel the shockwave, but far enough away to ensure complete safety for the ground troops. Viper 77, this Alpha Company leader. That was picture perfect. Target neutralized with zero risk to friendly forces. "How the hell did you know our exact position and the target coordinates?" "Alpha Company, I spent 3 months studying this terrain and mapping optimal approach angles for every possible target. I know this training area better than my own hometown." Harrison's face had gone completely pale. The precision Sarah had just demonstrated was beyond anything he could have coordinated from the ground, requiring knowledge of terrain features, wind patterns, and unit positioning that took months to acquire. "Desert Thunder Control, this is Charlie Company," came another voice through the radio. "We're moving toward Target Delta and need air support coordination for a time-on-target strike. We need ordnance to impact exactly 60 seconds after we reach our assault position." Harrison reached for the radio microphone, but his hand was shaking so badly he couldn't key it properly. The timing calculation for a coordinated assault required precise knowledge of Charlie Company's movement speed, the distance to their target, and the exact flight time for ordnance delivery. Sarah's voice filled the silence. "Charlie Company, this is Viper 77. I have your movement pattern tracked and calculated. When you reach your assault position, I'll have ordnance on target exactly 60 seconds later. I've been coordinating your timing patterns for the past 4 months. Viper 77 Charlie. Company leader. How do you know our movement patterns?" "Charlie Company, I've watched your unit train for this exact scenario 17 times. I know your average advance speed, your typical pause duration at rally points, and exactly how long it takes you to set up for an assault. I calculated your time on target requirements down to the second." Brennan lowered his binoculars, his mind reeling from the implications of what he was witnessing. Sarah wasn't just flying air support. She was demonstrating a level of preparation and competence that made their morning's decision look catastrophically ignorant. The F-16 circled the training area like a predator, its presence commanding respect from ground units who were finally receiving the coordination they had trained for. Sarah's voice continued directing the exercise with professional competence that highlighted the chaos of the previous hour. "Desert Thunder Control, this is Bravo Company. We need immediate retasking due to enemy movement in Sector 7. Can you provide updated target coordinates?" Harrison stared at his maps helplessly. Retasking required real-time intelligence analysis and the ability to quickly calculate New target coordinates, capabilities that required extensive preparation and training. Bravo Company, this is Viper 77. I have enemy movement. Tracked in Sector 7. Your new target coordinates are grid 87-Delta-4. I'm adjusting your approach vector to account for terrain features and wind direction. Viper 77, how do you have real-time enemy tracking? Bravo Company, I've been monitoring this exercise from altitude for the past 20 minutes. I have complete situational awareness of all ground movement and can provide updated coordinates as situations develop. The demonstration continued for another 90 minutes, with Sarah coordinating air support for 6 different ground units, managing 3 simultaneous target engagements, and providing real-time tactical updates based on her aerial perspective. Every calculation was perfect, every timing sequence executed flawlessly, and every safety protocol followed to the letter. In the command center, the contrast between Sarah's performance and Harrison's earlier struggles was becoming impossible to ignore. Marines who had worked with Sarah for months exchanged knowing looks, their respect for her expertise vindicated in the most public way possible. Desert Thunder Control, this is Echo Company Leader, came the final radio call of the exercise. We're requesting air support for our final assault on the primary objective. This needs to be a precision strike with multiple ordnance types. The primary objective was the most complex target of the entire exercise, requiring careful coordination between different types of ordnance and precise timing to simulate the destruction of a heavily fortified position. It was the kind of challenge that had taken Sarah weeks to plan properly. Harrison looked at his maps with complete desperation. The primary objective strike required knowledge of target construction, optimal impact angles, and sequenced ordnance delivery that he simply didn't possess. Echo Company, this is Viper 77. I'm prepared for the primary objective strike. I'll be delivering a sequenced attack with 3 different ordnance types, timed to maximize structural damage while ensuring complete safety for your assault team. Viper 77, Echo Company Leader. We're ready for your strike. Our assault team is in position and awaiting your coordination. Sarah's F-16 climbed to altitude, positioning for the most complex air support mission of the day. From her cockpit, she could see the entire training area spread out below, every unit, every target, every terrain feature that she had studied and memorized over months of preparation. Echo Company, beginning primary objective strike sequence. First, ordnance impact in 90 seconds, targeting the northern defensive positions. Second impact will be 60 seconds later on the eastern wall. Final impact on the central structure 30 seconds after that. Your assault team should begin their advance 15 seconds after the final impact. The F-16 dove toward the primary objective with lethal precision, delivering the first simulated strike exactly on schedule. The explosion set up a massive plume of smoke and debris, marking the beginning of a perfectly choreographed sequence that would conclude the exercise. As the second and third ordnance impacts followed with clockwork precision. Echo Company's assault team advanced exactly according to plan. Their movements synchronized with Sarah's strikes in a demonstration of coordination that represented months of planning and preparation. All ground units, this is Viper 77. Primary objective strike sequence complete. All targets neutralized, all friendly forces safe, exercise objectives achieved. It's been an honor working with you. The radio erupted in cheers from ground. Units who had just witnessed the most flawless air support coordination of their military careers. Every unit had received exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it, delivered with precision that exceeded their highest expectations. Sarah's F-16 performed a victory roll over the training area, a traditional gesture of celebration, and excellence that left no doubt about her skill as a pilot. The aircraft climbed back to altitude, its mission complete and its point made with undeniable clarity. In the command center, Colonel Brennan set down his binoculars and turned to face Major Harrison, who sat slumped in his chair like a man who had just watched his career dissolve before his eyes. "Major Harrison," Brennan said quietly, "I believe you owe Captain Mitchell an apology." Harrison's voice was barely a whisper. "Sir, I had no idea she was qualified to ... You had no idea because you didn't bother to find out. You made assumptions based on prejudice rather than facts, and those assumptions nearly compromised this entire exercise." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice carrying the satisfaction of vindication. "Sir, Captain Mitchell has been trying to tell you for months that proper air support coordination requires extensive preparation and training. She's been doing the job that Major Harrison claimed was unnecessary." Brennan nodded grimly. "And now we've all seen what happens when we replace competence with assumptions. Captain Mitchell just saved this exercise from complete failure." Through the radio speakers, Sarah's voice crackled one final time. "Desert Thunder Control, this is Viper 7-7. Exercise complete, all objectives achieved, returning to base. Thank you for allowing me to demonstrate proper air support coordination." The message was delivered with professional courtesy, but everyone in the command center understood the real meaning. They had just witnessed a masterclass in competence, delivered by the woman they had dismissed that morning as unqualified. F-16's engines wound down to silence as Sarah Mitchell taxied into the hangar at Nellis Air Force Base, the desert heat creating shimmering waves across the tarmac. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft with practiced efficiency, but their usual post-flight routine was interrupted by an unusual gathering of high-ranking officers waiting in the hangar bay. General Patricia Mitchell stood at the center of the group, her uniform crisp, despite having flown from Washington, D.C. on less than 4 hours' notice. Beside her stood General Robert Kane, commander of Air Combat Command, and Colonel Amanda Foster, whose knowing smile suggested she had anticipated this moment from the beginning. Sarah climbed down from the cockpit with deliberate composure, her flight suit damp with perspiration from 2 hours of intense flying. She had executed 17 separate air support missions, coordinated with 6 ground units simultaneously, and delivered ordnance with precision that would be discussed in military academies for years to come. "Captain Mitchell," General Kane said as Sarah approached, "I've been monitoring radio transmissions from Operation Desert Thunder. That was some of the finest close air support coordination I've witnessed in 30 years of service." Sarah snapped to attention. "Thank you, sir. I was simply ensuring the exercise proceeded according to plan." General Mitchell stepped forward, her expression mixing maternal pride with professional satisfaction. "Sarah, we need to discuss what happens next. Your performance today has created some complications at Camp Pendleton." The complications had begun within minutes of the exercise's conclusion. Alpha Company's commander, Captain Bradley, had submitted an immediate after-action report praising the air support coordination as exceptional. Charlie Company followed with similar commendations, specifically noting the precision timing that had made their assault sequence possible. But the most damaging report came from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had documented the morning's events with meticulous detail. Her report described Major Harrison's dismissal of Sarah, his inability to coordinate air support, and the near disaster that had been averted only by Sarah's intervention. "Sir," Sarah said carefully, "I hope my actions didn't create unnecessary conflict. I was simply performing my assigned duties." Colonel Foster laughed, a sound that carried decades of experience dealing with military politics. "Captain, your assigned duties just exposed 2 senior officers as incompetent bigots. That tends to create waves." The waves had already reached the Pentagon, where General Patricia Mitchell's secure phone had been ringing constantly for the past hour. The first call came from General Marcus Thompson, who commanded the Joint Training Facility at Pendleton and wanted to understand how his exercise had been saved by a pilot who wasn't officially assigned to the mission, The second call came from General Sarah Williams, the highest-ranking woman in the Air Force, who had spent her career fighting the same battles that Sarah had faced that morning. Williams wanted a full briefing on the incident, with particular attention to the discrimination aspects. The third call came from Senator Rebecca Foster of the Armed Services Committee, who had received a preliminary report about the incident. Through her military liaisons, Foster had built her political career on military reform and had been waiting for exactly this kind of case to demonstrate the ongoing problems with gender discrimination in the armed forces. Sarah, General Mitchell said, within the next 48 hours, this incident is going to become a case study in everything that's wrong with military leadership. Your performance today has made it impossible for anyone to argue that you were unqualified or that dismissing you was justified. At Camp Pendleton, the aftermath was unfolding with brutal efficiency. Colonel Brennan sat in his office, staring at a stack of reports that painted an increasingly damning picture of the morning's events. Every ground unit commander had submitted glowing evaluations of the air support they had received, with multiple requests to have Viper 77 assigned to future operations. The contrast with Major Harrison's performance was so stark that it couldn't be ignored or minimized. Harrison had demonstrated complete inability to coordinate even basic air support, while Sarah had managed complex multi-unit operations with flawless precision. Major Harrison himself sat in an empty briefing room, his career effectively over. The recording of his dismissal of Sarah had been captured by the room's standard documentation systems, preserving his exact words about playing dress-up and political correctness for review by superior officers. His attempt to coordinate the exercise had been similarly documented, creating an audio record of confusion, delays, and near misses that would be studied as an example of what happens when prejudice overrides competence. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez knocked on Brennan's office door, carrying a thick folder of documentation that she had been compiling throughout the day. Her expression was professionally neutral, but her eyes carried the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed justice being served. Sir, you requested a complete after-action report on today's exercise. I've included radio transcriptions, timing analyses, and performance evaluations from all participating units. Brennan accepted the folder with the resignation of a man who knew he was about to read his own professional obituary. Sergeant, off the record, how badly did we screw this up? Rodriguez considered her response carefully. Sir, Captain Mitchell coordinated the most successful joint training exercise in this facility's history. She demonstrated capabilities that exceeded our highest standards and saved the exercise from complete failure. And if we hadn't dismissed her this morning, then she would have been coordinating from the command center instead of from an F-16 cockpit. The results would have been identical, except we would have looked competent instead of— Rodriguez paused diplomatically. Instead of like incompetent bigots? I didn't say that, sir. Brennan opened the folder and began reading the first report, which detailed Alpha Company's engagement. The precision timing described in the report was so far beyond anything Harrison could have coordinated that it read like science fiction, compared to the morning's chaos. Sergeant Rodriguez, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. Did you know Captain Mitchell was a qualified fighter pilot? Yes, sir. Every Marine in this facility knew Captain Mitchell's qualifications. She never hid her background, and she frequently discussed her flight experience when explaining air support procedures. Brennan closed his eyes, the full weight of their mistake becoming clear. And Major Harrison? Major Harrison never asked about her qualifications, sir. He made assumptions based on other factors. The other factors were about to become the subject of intense scrutiny. General Thompson had already initiated a formal investigation into the incident, with particular focus on whether discrimination had influenced Harrison's decision-making. The investigation would examine Harrison's service record, revealing a pattern of similar incidents where he had dismissed female officers without properly evaluating their qualifications. It would also review Brennan's failure to intervene. Despite having access to Sarah's complete service record, back at Nellis, Sarah was beginning to understand the magnitude of what her demonstration had unleashed. General Kane had spent the past hour making phone calls to Washington, each conversation more intense than the last. "Captain Mitchell," Kane said after ending his latest call, "you've created a situation where the military's handling of gender discrimination is about to receive national attention. Your performance today was so exceptional that it's impossible for anyone to argue that you deserve to be dismissed." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. "Sir, I never intended to create a political situation. I just wanted to ensure the exercise succeeded." "That's exactly what makes this so powerful," General Mitchell interjected. "You didn't set out to prove a point. You simply demonstrated competence so clearly that the injustice became undeniable." Colonel Foster pulled up a chair, her expression growing serious. "Sarah, you need to understand what's going to happen next. This incident is going to be studied, analyzed, and discussed at the highest levels of military leadership. Your name is going to be associated with a watershed moment in military gender relations." The watershed moment was already beginning at Camp Pendleton, where word of the day's events had spread through the base with the speed of wildfire. Marines who had witnessed Sarah's dismissal and subsequent vindication were sharing the story with colleagues, creating a narrative that would be retold for years. Captain Bradley, Alpha Company's commander, had already written a detailed letter to his congressional representative, describing the morning's discrimination and the afternoon's demonstration of exceptional competence. The letter would reach Senator Foster's office within days, providing her with first-hand testimony from ground units. Staff. Sergeant Rodriguez had documented everything with the thoroughness of someone who understood the historical significance of what she had witnessed. Her reports would become primary source material for future studies of military discrimination and the importance of merit-based evaluation. The radio recordings from the exercise would be preserved as training materials, demonstrating the difference between competent and incompetent air support coordination. Sarah's calm professional voice would be contrasted with Harrison's confused stumbling, creating an audio testament to the consequences of prejudiced decision-making. "Sarah," General Mitchell said, "tomorrow morning you're going to receive orders transferring you to the Pentagon. You'll be working directly with the Chief of Staff on Air Support Doctrine Development." Sarah's eyes widened. Assignment to the Pentagon was a career-defining opportunity, typically reserved for the most exceptional officers. "Ma'am, are you certain?" "I'm still just a captain." "You're a captain who just demonstrated that 6 months of preparation and expertise cannot be replaced by assumptions and prejudice. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need in doctrine development." General Kane nodded agreement. "Captain, your performance today proved that proper air support coordination requires extensive training, detailed preparation, and intimate knowledge of ground operations. That's going to become the new standard for joint operations training." The new standard would bear Sarah's fingerprints, incorporating lessons learned from her meticulous approach to coordination and planning. Her methods would be studied and replicated, ensuring that future exercises benefited from the same level of preparation she had brought to Operation Desert Thunder. "There's one more thing," General Mitchell said, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "Major Harrison has been relieved of duty pending investigation. Colonel Brennan is being transferred to administrative duties. The investigation is going to examine their entire approach to gender integration and whether their actions constituted discrimination." Sarah felt no satisfaction from their downfall, only sadness that careers had been destroyed by prejudice that could have been easily avoided. "I never wanted anyone to be punished. I just wanted to do my job." "That's what makes you exceptional," Colonel Foster replied. "You focused on mission success rather than personal vindication. That's the kind of leadership this military needs. As the sun set over Nellis Air Force Base, Sarah Mitchell stood on the flight line watching F-16's practice night operations. Tomorrow she would begin a new assignment that would shape air support doctrine for the next generation of military operations. Her methods would become standard practice, and her story would be told in military academies as an example of how competence ultimately triumphs over prejudice. The morning had begun with humiliation and dismissal, but it was ending with vindication and opportunity. Sarah had proven that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination is simply demonstrating excellence so clearly that ignorance becomes impossible to defend. 6 months after Operation Desert Thunder, Captain Sarah Mitchell walked through the corridors of the Pentagon carrying a briefcase that contained the future of joint air support operations. The polished floors reflected fluorescent lights that had witnessed decades of military decisions, but few as transformative as the doctrine revision Sarah was about to present, the Mitchell Air Support Protocol, as it had come to be known throughout military circles, represented a fundamental shift in how the armed forces approached inter-service coordination. Born from 6 months of meticulous planning and validated by 2 hours of flawless execution, the protocol had been tested at 17 different bases across 4 countries. Sarah entered Conference Room 3E880, where 23 senior officers from all service branches waited to hear her final presentation. At the head of the table sat General Patricia Mitchell, no longer just Sarah's mother, but now the chair of the Joint Chiefs Air Operations Committee. The potential for accusations of nepotism had been eliminated by Sarah's performance record, which spoke louder than any family connection. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, her voice carrying the confidence earned through months of proving her expertise. 6 months ago, Operation Desert Thunder demonstrated the catastrophic consequences of inadequate air support coordination. Today, I'm presenting a comprehensive protocol that ensures such failures never occur again. The presentation screen displayed satellite imagery of Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, where the Mitchell Protocol had been implemented during Operation Persistent Freedom. Coalition forces had conducted 47 close air support missions over 3 weeks, with 0 friendly fire incidents and a success rate that exceeded historical averages by 38%. Colonel James Wright, representing Marine Corps Aviation, leaned forward in his chair. "Captain Mitchell, your protocol requires significantly more preparation time than current standard procedures. How do we justify the additional resource allocation?" Sarah advanced to the next slide, showing cost-benefit analysis that had taken her team 6 weeks to compile. "Sir, the additional preparation time is offset by reduced mission failures, decreased ammunition waste, and eliminated friendly fire incidents. The 3-week implementation in Afghanistan saved an estimated $2.3 million in munitions alone." The numbers were undeniable, but Sarah knew that military resistance to change often transcended logical arguments. The Mitchell Protocol challenged decades of established practice, requiring officers to acknowledge that detailed preparation could outperform improvised coordination. General Robert Kane, who had become one of Sarah's strongest advocates, addressed the room skeptics. "Gentlemen, Captain Mitchell's methods have been validated in combat conditions. The 82nd Airborne specifically requested her protocol for their upcoming deployment precisely because it works." The 82nd Airborne's endorsement carried significant weight, representing practical validation from troops who would stake their lives on the coordination quality. Their request had come after witnessing Sarah's protocol during joint training exercises at Fort Bragg, where her methods had transformed chaotic air support into surgical precision. Admiral Rebecca Foster, representing Naval Aviation, studied the deployment statistics. "Captain, your protocol shows impressive results in ground support scenarios. How does it adapt to maritime operations where variables change more rapidly?" Sarah had anticipated this question, having spent 3 months aboard the USS Gerald Ford, testing her methods in naval environments. Admiral, maritime operations actually benefit more from detailed preparation because ocean conditions create additional variables. Our testing showed 42% improvement in target acquisition times when pilots had comprehensive briefings on sea state, wind patterns, and ship movement predictions. The maritime testing had provided unexpected insights into coordination, challenges that land-based operations rarely encountered. Sarah's team had developed specialized protocols for carrier-based operations, accounting for deck movement, launch sequence timing, and recovery procedures that required split-second precision. Major General Lisa Thompson, commanding Air Force Special Operations, raised concerns about rapid deployment scenarios. Captain Mitchell, Special Operations often require immediate air support without time for extensive preparation. How does your protocol adapt to time-critical situations? Ma'am, the protocol includes rapid deployment modules that can be implemented with 30 minutes preparation. The key insight is that even limited preparation following structured guidelines produces better results than improvised coordination. Sarah displayed combat footage from Syria, where special operations teams had used the rapid deployment version during a hostage rescue mission. The air support had been coordinated with precision that allowed ground teams to operate within 50 meters of ordnance impact, enabling a successful rescue without civilian casualties. The Syria operation had become a classified case study in precision coordination, demonstrating that Sarah's principles could be adapted to the most demanding circumstances. The success had led to adoption requests from special operations units across 3 theater commands. Colonel Michael Chun, representing Army Aviation, questioned the protocol's complexity. Captain, implementing your system requires significant additional training for coordination personnel. How do we manage the transition without disrupting ongoing operations? Sarah had spent 4 months developing implementation strategies that minimized operational disruption. Sir, we've created a phased training program that can be integrated with existing exercise schedules. Units can implement basic protocols immediately while developing advanced capabilities over 12 weeks. The training program represented another innovation, using virtual reality simulations that allowed coordinators to practice complex scenarios without requiring actual aircraft. The simulations had reduced training costs by 60% while improving competency scores across all participating units. General Patricia Mitchell observed the discussion with professional detachment, despite her personal investment in Sarah's success. The room's dynamics had shifted during the presentation, moving from skepticism to serious consideration of implementation logistics. Captain Mitchell, General Kane said, "Your protocol requires coordinators to have significantly more technical knowledge than current standards. How do we ensure adequate personnel qualification?" Sir, we've developed a certification program that builds on existing military education. The additional technical requirements can be met through a 6-week course that we've already tested at Fort Leavenworth and the Air Force Academy. The certification program had produced surprising results, with graduation rates exceeding 90% among participants who had been properly screened. More importantly, certified coordinators showed marked improvement in decision-making under pressure, suggesting that technical knowledge enhanced rather than complicated operational performance. Admiral Foster reviewed implementation timelines displayed on the presentation screen. Captain, assuming we approve protocol adoption, what's your recommended rollout schedule? Sarah had anticipated this question, having learned that military transformation required carefully managed change. Admiral, I recommend beginning with volunteer units that have expressed interest, followed by mandatory implementation for units entering combat deployment cycles. Full implementation across all services within 18 months. The rollout schedule reflected lessons learned from previous military innovations, avoiding the resistance that often accompanied mandatory immediate adoption. Units that volunteered for early implementation would serve as advocates, demonstrating benefits to skeptical colleagues. Colonel Wright addressed the fundamental question underlying the entire discussion. Captain Mitchell, you're asking us to completely change how we've been conducting air support for decades. What gives you confidence that your approach is universally superior? Sarah paused, considering her response carefully. Sir, I'm not asking you to trust my opinion. I'm asking you to examine the evidence. Every metric we can measure, accuracy, efficiency, safety, cost-effectiveness, improves when proper preparation replaces improvised coordination. The evidence filled 3 thick binders that Sarah's team had compiled over 6 months of testing. Combat footage, statistical analyses, cost-benefit calculations, and testimonials from ground troops created an overwhelming case for protocol adoption. Major General Thompson leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Captain, implementing your protocol essentially means acknowledging that we've been doing air support coordination wrong for decades. That's a significant admission from military leadership. Ma'am, respectfully, it means acknowledging that we can do better. Military excellence requires constant improvement, not defensive outdated methods. The room fell silent as senior officers contemplated the implications of Sarah's statement. Adopting her protocol would require admitting that previous methods had been inadequate, but continuing with inferior coordination would mean accepting preventable casualties and mission failures. General Kane broke the silence. Captain Mitchell, your presentation has been thorough and compelling. However, I have one final question. 6 months ago, you were dismissed from Operation Desert Thunder for supposedly lacking qualifications. Today, you're presenting doctrine that will reshape military operations. What lessons should leadership draw from this transformation? Sarah had prepared for this question, knowing that the personal narrative was inseparable from the professional. Innovation. Sir, the lesson is that competence exists regardless of preconceptions about who possesses it. Excellence can emerge from unexpected sources if we evaluate capabilities rather than assumptions. The answer resonated through the conference room, carrying implications that extended far beyond air support protocols. Sarah's journey from dismissed liaison officer to doctrine developer represented a broader truth about military talent and the importance of merit-based evaluation. General Patricia Mitchell spoke for the first time during the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a choice. We can implement protocols that have been proven to save lives and improve mission success, or we can continue with methods that have been demonstrated as inferior. The evidence speaks for itself. The vote that followed was closer than Sarah had hoped, but decisive enough to ensure implementation. 17 officers voted for immediate adoption, with 6 requesting additional testing phases. The Mitchell Protocol would become standard practice across all service branches within 2 years. As the meeting concluded, Sarah gathered her materials with the satisfaction of someone who had transformed personal vindication into systemic improvement. The humiliation of being dismissed from Operation Desert Thunder had motivated her to prove not just her own competence, but the importance of proper preparation and planning. Colonel Wright approached as other officers filed out of the conference room. Captain Mitchell, I opposed your protocol during the discussion, but I want you to know it was based on implementation concerns, not doubts about your capabilities. What you've accomplished is remarkable. Similar conversations occurred throughout the Pentagon that afternoon as word of the protocol's adoption spread through military channels. Sarah's story had become legend. The liaison officer, who had been dismissed for incompetence and returned hours later, flying an F-16 to demonstrate her expertise. But the legend missed the deeper truth. Sarah's success hadn't come from dramatic vindication or spectacular demonstrations of skill. It had come from months of patient work, careful analysis, and methodical proof that excellence could emerge from proper preparation and attention to detail. The F-16 flight over. Camp Pendleton had been spectacular, but the real victory was in Conference Room 3, E880, where evidence and logic had overcome institutional resistance to change. Sarah had transformed personal injustice into systemic improvement, ensuring that future generations of military personnel would benefit from better coordination and planning. As Sarah walked through the Pentagon's corridors toward her new office, she reflected on the journey from humiliation to triumph. The morning when she'd been forced to remove her flight suit felt like a lifetime ago, but the lessons learned from that experience would influence military operations for decades to come. 2 years after the Pentagon presentation, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood on the observation deck at Fort Benning, watching the 75th Ranger Regiment conduct their first exercise using the fully implemented Mitchell Protocol. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the training area, where young soldiers moved with precision that would have been impossible under the old coordination methods. Lightning 6, this is Thunder Base. We have your position marked and are beginning a precision timing sequence for your advance. The voice crackling through the radio belonged to Second Lieutenant Amanda Chun, a recent graduate of the Air Support Coordination School that now required certification in the Mitchell Protocol. Chun's calm professionalism reminded Sarah of her own early days, when attention to detail was seen as obsessive rather than essential. The coordination unfolding below represented everything Sarah had fought to achieve. Ground units advanced with confidence, knowing their air support would arrive exactly when needed. Pilots delivered ordnance with surgical precision, guided by coordinates that had been verified through multiple systems. The chaos and improvisation that had once characterized joint operations had been replaced by methodical excellence. Major David Foster, the base's new air operations officer, joined Sarah on the observation deck. "Ma'am, the Rangers requested this demonstration specifically to show new personnel what proper coordination looks like. They've adopted your protocol as their gold standard." Sarah smiled at the irony. The same type of training exercise that had nearly ended her career was now being used to showcase the methods she had developed. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that young soldiers would never experience the coordination failures that had once put lives at risk. "Major Foster, how are implementation rates across other commands?" 100% compliance across all theaters, ma'am. The last holdout units were convinced after seeing combat results from Afghanistan. Nobody argues with methods that save lives. The Afghanistan results had been decisive. Operation Mountain Strike had used the Mitchell Protocol for a complex multi-service assault involving Army Rangers, Marine Air Support, and Navy Special Operations. The coordination had been so precise that the mission was completed with 0 casualties and achieved all objectives ahead of schedule. General Robert Kane had called it the most flawlessly executed joint operation in modern military history. More importantly, the participating units had requested that all future operations use the same coordination standards. Sarah's radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "Thunder Base, this is Viper 27. I have visualized the target area and am ready to begin the precision strike sequence." The pilot's voice carried the confidence that came from comprehensive briefing and detailed preparation. Unlike the improvised chaos of the old system, every aspect of the mission had been planned, rehearsed, and verified before the aircraft ever left the ground. Viper 27, Thunder Base confirms all friendly personnel are clear of the target zone. You are cleared hot for precision strike. Impact in 90 seconds. The F-16 that appeared on the horizon moved with the same fluid grace that Sarah remembered from her own demonstration flight. But this pilot was using protocols that had been refined through hundreds of exercises, tested in dozens of combat operations, and validated by measurable improvements in every performance metric. The Ordnance struck its target with precision that would have been impossible under the old coordination methods. The explosion occurred exactly where planned, at exactly the right time, with no risk to friendly forces who were positioned according to carefully calculated safety margins. All stations, this is Thunder Base. Target neutralized, mission complete. All units proceed to Rally Point Alpha for debrief. The exercise concluded with the same methodical precision that had characterized every phase. Ground units moved to predetermined positions. Aircraft returned to base following established flight paths, and coordination personnel began documenting lessons learned for future improvement. Major Foster consulted his tablet, reviewing performance metrics that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. "Ma'am, this exercise achieved 100% mission success with 0 safety incidents. Response time was 47% faster than historical averages." The numbers represented more than statistical improvement. They represented lives saved and missions succeeded. Every percentage point of improvement translated to real-world benefits for soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who depended on air support coordination. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from staff. Sergeant Rodriguez, who was now Master Sergeant Rodriguez and served as an instructor at the Air Support Coordination School. The message was brief. "Watching the exercise footage. You should be proud. Your vindication became everyone's victory." The personal vindication had indeed become something larger. Sarah's humiliation at Camp Pendleton had sparked changes that improved military effectiveness across all services. Young officers now learned coordination methods as standard curriculum, rather than the improvised techniques that had once passed for professional competence. A black sedan pulled up to the observation building, and Sarah recognized the driver as Colonel Amanda Foster, her former commander at Nellis, who had now been promoted to Pentagon oversight of training standardization. Foster emerged from the vehicle carrying a briefcase that Sarah suspected contained new developments in her ongoing work. "Sarah," Foster said as she joined them on the observation deck, "I have news from Washington. The Joint Chiefs have approved expansion of your protocols to NATO alliance partners. You'll be leading a team to implement coordination standards across 12 different countries." The international assignment represented recognition that the Mitchell Protocol had transcended American military innovation to become a universal improvement in joint operations. Allied forces that had observed American coordination improvements were requesting training and certification in the same methods. "Colonel Foster, that's an incredible opportunity, but I have to ask, are we certain that Allied forces will accept training from the officer who was once dismissed for incompetence?" Foster laughed, the sound carrying years of satisfaction at watching prejudice give way to proven results. "Sarah, you're no longer the officer who was dismissed. You're the officer who revolutionized air support coordination. Allied commanders specifically requested you by name." The transformation in Sarah's reputation reflected broader changes in military culture. Officers who had once dismissed detailed preparation as unnecessary complexity now competed to demonstrate their commitment to thorough planning and coordination. Major General Lisa Thompson, who had questioned the protocol's complexity during the Pentagon presentation, had become one of its strongest advocates after witnessing results in special operations. Her units now achieved mission success rates that exceeded previous standards by margins that seemed impossible under the old methods. Even Colonel Marcus Brennan, who had been transferred to administrative duties after the Camp Pendleton incident, had privately acknowledged that dismissing Sarah had been the worst decision of his military career. His current assignment involved analyzing coordination failures, work that had given him painful insight into the importance of proper planning. Major Derek Harrison had left the military entirely, his career ending when the investigation revealed a pattern of discrimination that extended far beyond the single incident with Sarah. His departure had sent a clear message throughout the military that Prejudice-based decision-making would not be tolerated. Sarah, Colonel Foster continued, there's something else. The President has nominated you for promotion to full colonel. The Senate Armed Services Committee wants to hear your testimony about the importance of merit-based evaluation in military leadership. The nomination represented more than personal advancement. It was recognition that Sarah's experience embodied principles essential to military effectiveness. Her testimony would influence policies affecting thousands of current and future military personnel. As the sun set over Fort Benning, Sarah watched the last aircraft of the day return to base. Each landing represented successful completion of missions that would have been far more dangerous and less effective under the coordination methods that had prevailed. Just 2 years earlier, the observation deck began to empty as officers returned to their duties, but Sarah remained, reflecting on the journey from humiliation to triumph. The morning when she had been forced to remove her flight suit at Camp Pendleton had begun as personal injustice, but had ultimately become the catalyst for systematic improvement. Her phone rang with a call from General Patricia Mitchell, who was now serving as the military's senior advisor on gender integration and equal opportunity. Sarah, I've been watching news coverage of today's exercise. The reporters are calling it a demonstration of American military superiority, but we know it's really a demonstration of what happens when competence is valued over prejudice. Mom, it's strange to think that being humiliated and dismissed turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to my career. Not just your career, sweetheart. Your response to that humiliation improved military effectiveness for everyone who serves. That's a legacy worth the pain you endured. As Sarah drove away from Fort Benning that evening, she passed a sign announcing the opening of the Sarah Mitchell Center for Joint Operations Excellence. The facility would train the next generation of coordination specialists, ensuring that the improvements she had pioneered would continue evolving and improving. The center represented the ultimate transformation of personal vindication into institutional progress. Future officers would learn proper coordination as fundamental military science, rather than discovering its importance through costly failures. Sarah's story had become required reading at military academies, but not as a tale of dramatic revenge or spectacular vindication. Instead, it was taught as an example of how professional excellence could overcome institutional prejudice and how individual competence could drive systematic improvement. The simple woman who had been told to take off her uniform had proven that assumptions about capability are dangerous luxuries that military organizations cannot afford. Her legacy would ensure that future generations of service members would be evaluated on their merits rather than their demographics. Most importantly, Sarah had demonstrated that the most powerful response to discrimination is not anger or confrontation, but the quiet persistence of excellence that makes prejudice impossible to defend. Her F-16 flight over Camp Pendleton had lasted only 2 hours, but the principles it represented would influence military operations for decades to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.